February the 21st, 1977, Chicago, Illinois. Firefighters arrived at an apartment blaze in a high-rise on North Pine Grove Avenue. The flames were hungry, devouring everything in their path. As they worked to contain the inferno, something else stopped them cold. Beneath the smouldering wreckage of a mattress, they found her. A woman's body, partially disrobed, a butcher knife buried deep in her chest. The fire was no accident. It was meant to erase her, to consume her completely. But even in death, Teresita Besa would not be silenced. Because weeks later, in a house miles away, she would return. Not in whispers, not in dreams, but inside another woman's body. I'm Sarah Powell, and this is Obscurata, because some stories have no ending. Before she became a ghost, Teresita Besa was just another face in the crowd, a woman of quiet strength, dreams and kindness. Born in the Philippines in 1929, she had a passion for music and a sharp mind. She came to the United States for a better life, working as a respiratory therapist at Edgewater Hospital in Chicago. By all accounts, she was gentle, soft-spoken, she lived alone and kept to herself. And yet, somewhere in the shadows of her ordinary life, a predator waited. Someone who would take everything from her. But Teresita Besa was not the kind of woman who would go quietly. The night of February the 21st, 1977, was unremarkable, until it wasn't. At 8:40 p.m, fire erupted from Teresita's apartment. When firefighters broke through the door, they expected smoke, destruction. They didn't expect to find a body beneath the charred remains of a mattress. She'd been stabbed, her clothes torn, her body arranged to suggest an assault. But the autopsy revealed no evidence of sexual violence. The scene was staged, a deliberate deception. Whoever had done this had set the fire to erase their crime, and it should have worked. But Teresita Besa would not stay buried. The Chicago PD did everything they could. At first, they questioned neighbours, combed through Teresita's life and searched for a motive. Was it robbery? No. A lover's quarrel? No. A random act of violence? Maybe. But there were no leads, no suspects. The case went cold. By the summer of 1977, it was just another unsolved homicide, until the phone rang. Dr. Jose Chua had never met Teresita Besa. He was a man of science, respected, logical, the kind of man who did not believe in ghosts. And yet, one night, as he sat at home, his wife, Remedios Reme Chua, became someone else. It started as a headache, a vague discomfort. Then her body went rigid. Her hands clenched into fists. And when she spoke, her voice was no longer her own. Find him. He took everything. My jewellery, my life. She was speaking in Tagalog. And she was not Reme anymore. She was Teresita Besa. Dr. Dewar watched in horror as his wife, his rational, grounded wife, became possessed by the spirit of a dead woman. She convulsed, shook, her eyes unfocused, staring at something only she could see. And when she spoke, it was in a voice that did not belong to her. Teresita's voice. She named her killer, Alan Showery, and then, as suddenly as it had begun, Reme collapsed. Her breathing slowed, her body stilled, and for a moment, all was silent. The police were sceptical. Tip from a ghost. It was absurd. But desperation makes people listen. They investigated Alan Showery, a medical orderly who worked alongside Teresita at the hospital. At first, nothing seemed unusual. No connection to the crime, until they searched his apartment. And there, they found it, Teresita Besa's jewellery. But it wasn't in his possession. His girlfriend was wearing it. Faced with the evidence, Showery's denial crumbled. He confessed. He had gone to Teresita's apartment that night under the guise of fixing her television. Instead, he strangled her, stole her jewellery, and set the fire to destroy the evidence. It should have worked. It should have been the perfect crime. But Teresita Besa refused to let him go unpunished. In February 1979, 2 years after her murder, Alan Showery was convicted and sentenced to 14 years in prison, though he was released after serving a reduced term. Teresita Besa should have faded into obscurity. Her murder should have remained unsolved. But someone, refused to let that happen. Skeptics say Remigius Dewar subconsciously pieced it together, that it was coincidence, not possession. But believers, they say Teresita came back, that she refused to rest until justice was served, because some stories never end. It started with a dream, a restless night, a vision that felt too real. A voice whispered from beyond the grave. In 1827, in the quiet village of Polstead, England, a young woman named Maria Martin went missing. Her family waited. Days turned into weeks. No one could find her. But then Maria's stepmother, Anne Martin, began having disturbing dreams. Anne saw Maria. She was dead, buried beneath the floor of the Red Barn. At first, she dismissed it, just a dream, no more. But the visions returned, again and again, pressing into her mind like a terrible truth. Maria was waiting to be found. Anne was certain Maria was trying to tell her something. By the spring of 1827, Maria Martin was 26 years old. Life had not been easy for her. Though beautiful and charming, she had endured heartbreak, scandal, and the weight of motherhood without her husband. She had borne 2 children, but only one, little Thomas Henry, was still alive. The father of the boy, Peter Matthews, provided for the child, but had never married her. It was not the life Maria had envisioned. And then there was William Corder. Corder was nearly the same age as Maria, the son of a local farmer. But unlike his father, who had been well respected, William was a known liar, a fraudster, a schemer. His schoolmates had called him Foxy for his sly ways. He had already committed forgery, fraud, and theft, once passing a fake cheque for £93. another time conspiring with a known thief to steal a pig from the neighbouring village. And yet, when he spoke, he had a certain charm about him. Perhaps Maria believed he was different with her. Perhaps she hoped that, after their child was born, he would finally do the right thing. But when Maria gave birth in 1827, tragedy struck. The child did not survive. Later, rumours would suggest something more sinister. Whispers that the infant had not died naturally at all. And yet, despite the loss, William still promised that they would wed. He swore to Maria that they would start anew together. And on the evening of May the 18th, 1827, he gave her one last instruction: meet him at the Red Barn. It had been William's idea to elope. He had come to Maria's stepmother, Anne Martin, with a tale of urgency, claiming that the parish officers were after Maria, that they had obtained a warrant to prosecute her for having an illegitimate child. It was a lie, but Maria didn't know that. Initially, William planned to take her away on May 16th. Then he delayed, first to the 17th, then to the 18th, excuses one after another. Some say he claimed his brother had fallen ill. Others say that, by this time, all of his brothers were dead, and it was simply a stalling tactic. On May the 18th, William arrived at Maria's home in a rush. His voice was urgent, panicked. The parish constable was coming for her, he claimed. There was no time to waste. They had to leave immediately. Maria hesitated. She feared being seen, leaving the village with him in broad daylight. But William had a plan. She would leave quietly, and he would carry her belongings ahead to the Red Barn, where she could change before they continued on to Ipswich. And so, Maria walked out the door for the last time. The Red Barn stood half a mile away from Maria's cottage. It was an isolated place, standing alone on Barnfield Hill, a structure meant for storage, not for secrets. But that was where William had told her to meet him, and so she walked, her head pounding, her pulse quickening. We'll never know what was said between them when she arrived. We will never know what she saw in his eyes. But what we do know is that Maria Martin was never seen alive again. Days passed, then weeks, then months, and though Maria had vanished, William Calder was still in Polstead. When people asked about Maria, Calder had excuses. First, she was in Ipswich. Then she'd moved somewhere else. And then, when the questions persisted, he left. He fled Polstead himself. And that's when the letters began. In a letter to Maria's relatives, Calder stated that they were married and residing in the Isle of Wight. He gave excuse after excuse for why she had not written herself. She was unwell, she had hurt her hand, the letters must have been lost. But something was wrong, and Maria's stepmother could feel it. For nearly a year, Maria's family held on to hope that she was alive, somewhere, waiting for the right time to return. But then the dreams began. Anne Martin, Maria's stepmother, began seeing something in her sleep. Visions of Maria, pleading with her, calling to her, telling her where to look. And when Anne awoke, her blood ran cold. Because Maria wasn't just missing. She was waiting beneath the soil of the Red Barn, where her murderer thought no one would ever find her. But the dead don't stay buried forever. Finally, on April the 19th, 1828, Anne could take it no longer. She turned to her husband, Thomas Martin, and told him what she'd seen. That morning, under a sky thick with low-hanging clouds, Thomas Martin set out for the Red Barn. He carried nothing but a shovel, the weight of his wife's words pressing into his mind. Anne had told him where to look, one of the grain storage bins. He pushed away the dried husks and plunged the blade into the dirt. One dig, another, then another. There, wrapped in a sack, was Maria. Maria's body was in a state of decay. Even death could not erase her identity. She was still recognisable by her long dark hair, her clothing, familiar even in ruin. But it was her missing tooth that confirmed what everyone feared. Maria was dead, and she had never left Olmsted. On April the 20th, 1828, an inquest was held at the Cock Inn, a tavern that still stands to this day. Maria's sister Anne stepped forward to formally identify the remains. The room fell silent as the magistrates took in one final piece of damning evidence: a green handkerchief tied tightly around Maria's neck. It belonged to William Corder. It was a Monday morning, August 23rd, 1828, inside Everley Grove House. Corder sat in the parlour, surrounded by 4 ladies, casually boiling eggs. He had a watch placed in front of him, meticulously timing their cooking, his dressing gown tied neatly around his waist. He had no idea that his past was about to crash through the door. When he opened the door, he was greeted by James Lee. The officer had gained entry under the pretence of seeking a place for his daughter to board. And then Lee revealed the truth. Corder froze as Lee leaned in, his voice low but firm. "William Corder, I arrest you for the murder of Maria Martin." Corder's face remained carefully blank. Then he shook his head. He denied everything. He swore he had never even heard of Maria Martin. Lee wasted no time. As soon as Corder was secured, he searched the house. What he found was damning. First, a pair of pistols, purchased on the day of Maria's murder. Then, a series of letters, addressed to a mysterious Mr. Gardner. Lee suspected these may have contained warnings about Maria's body being discovered. And finally, a passport issued by the French ambassador. This last discovery sent a chill through the room. It was clear what it meant. William Corder had been preparing to flee the country. If the officers had arrived even a few days later, he would have disappeared forever. And just like that, the game was over. William Corder, the man who had lured Maria Martin to the Red Barn with sweet words and false promises, was caught. He was taken into custody and transported back to Suffolk, where he would soon face justice for his crimes. But what he didn't yet know, what he could never have predicted, was that this trial wouldn't just be about murder. Because by now, Maria's story had taken on a life of its own. The trial of William Corder was not just another case. It was an event, a spectacle. The entire country had become obsessed with the murder at the Red Barn. And when Corder was finally brought back to Suffolk, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that he would stand trial for his crimes. The trial was held at Shire Court in Bury St Edmunds, and the interest was so great that proceedings had to be delayed just to accommodate the crowds. By July 21st, 1828, Weeks before the trial even began, every inn and hotel in town was already full. On August the 7th, the day the court was finally in session, the crowd surged outside the building, so large that the judge and court officials had to physically push their way through the mob just to enter the courthouse. Inside, the atmosphere was no less tense. Entry to the trial was by ticket only, and every seat was occupied. At the centre of it all sat William Corder, the man who had spent the last year building a new life while Maria Martin lay rotting in the dirt. The trial was overseen by Chief Baron of the Exchequer, William Alexander. He was deeply unhappy with how the press had covered the case, claiming that the attention had been to the, quote, manifest detriment of the prisoner at the bar. But the Times, one of the very newspapers fueling the frenzy, had a different opinion. They praised the public for their good sense in, quote, aligning themselves against Corder. When it came time to enter a plea, Corder stood and declared himself not guilty. One of the trial's greatest mysteries was how Maria Martin had actually died. Her body had been in the ground for nearly a year, and decomposition had erased much of the evidence. There was no clear cause of death. Investigators had their theories. Some believed she'd been stabbed in the eye with a sharp instrument, possibly Corder's short sword. But there was another possibility. What if the wound had not been made by a killer at all? What if, instead, it had been made by her father's spade as he dug up the body? Strangulation couldn't be ruled out either. Corder's green handkerchief had been tied around Maria's neck, an ominous sign that she had been choked to death. But then, there was the gunshot wound. Maria's skull bore the marks of being shot. In the end, the prosecution had no choice but to charge Corder with multiple methods of murder. The indictment accused him of shooting Maria, strangling her, and stabbing her, covering every possibility to ensure a conviction. The first to testify was Maria's stepmother, Anne. She retold the chilling events of the day Maria disappeared, of William's sudden visit, of his insistence that Maria leave at once, of the dreams that led to the body's discovery. The courtroom listened in rapt silence. Then came Thomas, Maria's father, the man who had unearthed his daughter's body with his own hands. He described the moment he uncovered the sack, the horror of what he found. When he finished speaking, no one in the room doubted that Maria had been murdered. But it was Maria's 10-year-old brother, George, who drove the nail into Corden's coffin. The young boy bravely told the jury that he had seen Corder with a loaded pistol before Maria's disappearance. Even worse, he claimed to have seen him later that day, walking away from the barn with a pickaxe. James Lee, the London officer who had captured Corder, then took the stand. He detailed the evidence found at Corder's house: the pistols bought on the day of the murder, the suspicious letters, the French passport suggesting Corder had been planning to flee. The prosecution laid it all out, piece by damning piece. And then it was Corder's turn. Corder did not deny being in the Red Barn that day, but he had an explanation. He claimed that he and Maria argued, that he left the barn in anger, and as he walked away, he heard a gunshot. According to Corder, he ran back, only to find Maria dead. One of his pistols lay beside her, and in a panic, he buried her body in the grain storage bin. But he swore he had not killed her. As Calder finished his plea, he begged the jury to give him the benefit of the doubt. 35 minutes, that's all it took. When the jury filed back in, the air in the courtroom was electric with expectation. The verdict was read aloud. Guilty. Judge Baron Alexander did not waste words. He sentenced William Calder to hang. You be taken back to the prison whence you came, and that you there be hanged by the neck until you are dead, and that your body shall afterwards be dissected and anatomized. For 3 days, William Calder agonized over whether to confess. His new wife pleaded with him. The prison chaplain urged him to save his soul. His jailer, his governor, even strangers begged him to tell the truth. On the eve of his execution, he finally admitted it. He'd not stabbed Maria, but he had shot her in the eye. Some stories end with justice, and others, they refuse to stay buried. Maria Martin, lured to the Red Barn and silenced forever, she whispered her truth from beyond the grave, leading to her killer's unmasking. Over a century later, in a Chicago apartment, Teresita Besa, murdered and forgotten, spoke through another woman, ensuring justice reached beyond the grave. If you have your own theories, the discussion group is now open. You can find the link in the podcast notes. And if the paranormal intrigues you, be sure to check out The Whispering Woods, where we explore hauntings, folklore, things like that. I want to say a huge thank you to Rog as well for editing and fact-checking. And as always, thank you for listening. Until next time, stay curious and keep the lights on, just in case.
PowerPoint doesn't help on the battlefield. At GDIT, we build IT systems that can't fail. At the edge, for intelligence, and places we can't name. Applying AI to defend against aerial attacks, predicting threats to U.S. troops on the ground, and securing our nation's intelligence with cyber. Because the mission doesn't care about theories, it needs technology that works. Learn how GDIT delivers mission-ready technology at gdit.com.